Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We are live once again, and we have such an amazing guest today. So, this is Chip DeLorenzo. He is a dedicated Montessori educator since 1995. Maybe some of you weren't even around when he already started his Montessori journey. He has an impressive career spanning nearly 3 decades. So, he was co authoring the influential book Positive Discipline in the Montessori Classroom with Jane Nelsen, and Chip has become a respected voice in the Montessori community. As a teacher, trainer, and school consultant, he has empowered thousands of Montessori teachers and parents through engaging workshops and insightful lectures. So if you haven't been to one of them, I highly recommend so. Chip's leadership and dedication were evident during his 20-year tenure as the head of school at Damariscotta Montessori School, where he also taught and nurtured countless students. His expertise is backed by AMS certifications in early childhood, lower and upper elementary education, and he has worked extensively with Montessori adolescent students. So Chip is currently living in Loveland, Ohio with his wife, Kathy. And Chip is the proud father of not just one, two, three, or four, but five Montessori educated children. His personal and professional experiences offer a unique perspective on Montessori parenting and its evolution over the years. So, Chip, we are so thrilled to have you here. And let's just get this started because I think you have so much to share with the world, and we can't wait to hear from you.
Well, thanks for having me, and it's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, welcome, Chip. Great Thanks. To be in conversation with you again. So yeah, let's get started. So obviously, we're going to be talking about positive discipline and Montessori, and I want to know how you originally come across positive discipline and start using it at home with your 5 children.
Well, the simple answer, Amanda, is failure. That's how I came across positive discipline. Right? I think it brings a lot of us to this kind of work. And so, as a new young teacher, I was really Montessori teacher. I was quickly underwater and over my head. And it's funny. I look back at my first classroom now, and it really wasn't that difficult, right? But it was for me, right? And so I came into the classroom. I was single. I didn't have any children at the time. And like a lot of new young teachers, I had an armful of albums and a heart full of hope. I was going to change the world.
Yeah.
And then I found out that the children were going to change me before I changed the world. That was the beginning of my journey. And luckily, I had a wonderful mentor who saw my struggles, who empathized with me, but she also embodied that idea of kind and firm that we talk a lot about in positive discipline. And she put her arm around me and said, "Chip, you're inviting a lot of the misbehavior that's happening in your classroom." And it was one of those things that kind of goes right past the processor up here and right down into your heart, and it's true when you get that kind of feedback. And she recommended some of Jane's work. I was lucky enough to be living fairly close to where Jane's offices were, and I found myself in a workshop. And just to for time's sake, I'll say it changed everything for me. It was a process. It was definitely a journey, but almost immediately, my relationships with the children began to change. And I think one of the things that it sometimes doesn't get talked about enough, in my opinion, and that is that, like me, when you don't have those skills, it winds up being a snowball, right? Because I didn't have the skills. I would get frustrated. My misbehavior would invite the misbehavior of the children, which invited more misbehavior from me. And it was a cycle. And I was going home at the end of the day, and I've been in that spot as a parent too. You go home at the end of the day and you wonder, what, this was not what I expected, right? And there's a bunch of research out there that says now, both for parents and for children, like when we're we're feeling successful in our relationships with children, we do better, right? The kids do better, we do better, and that snowball can turn around, right? When we feel more successful, and most of us have had that experience, right? You've like where you're feeling confident and successful with your own children or children in the classroom, you do better. And the children, they have a radar for that. Right? When you're feeling confident and competent, they pick up on that. They feel more secure. Their behavior matches that security. And so this work I found was, I mean, it probably, in terms of my career, allowed me to stay teaching, because I was, I would have probably burned out in about 2 to 3 years had I not found this. And I would have been one amongst many teachers in the history of teachers that left the profession because it was too stressful. And I'm not saying that this is going to eliminate all stress from everybody's life, because life is difficult, relationships are messy. But it certainly gave me the ability to feel confident and be competent with the kids, and actually have context for when I made a mistake. I wasn't just fishing in the abyss for an answer. I had something I could go back to and reflect when I felt like I made a mistake or something didn't go the way that I wanted to, that I could find a solution, so I could go back and either repair it or do it differently the next time. And I think that is one of the things, especially as a parent, that really is so critical, because it's so easy to get caught in the soup of those relationships and feel like you're drowning, not know what to do. And without answers, it brings us to a lot of stress. And then we wind up doing worse rather than better. So
yeah,
it's a long answer to the question.
That's fascinating. I actually wish I'd had positive discipline in the workplace when I was working in my last company. It would have made so much difference, because I actually did burn out ships, so like properly. So I discovered it a bit too late, but it's never too late for anyone.
And it's interesting how you talk actually about your mentor here in the book, and you talk so much about these early experiences of yours, right, Chip? And I have to say, like, as a teacher as well, I obviously, like, I didn't begin my teaching career in a Montessori classroom, or even like having, like learning about positive discipline. And it's exactly what you said. It's once you know what's happening, and once you know that you have the tools and you've got the support, everything changes. Life is never going to be easy, especially in a classroom. But once you know what to do when, like, life throws you a curveball, or maybe a child is kind of like throwing a curveball as well, it just makes you feel a bit more grounded, and you kind of like know how to navigate these situations with a lot more ease, a lot more compassion. I think that this is something that really struck me really hard. It's like, I think I was lacking a little bit of the compassion, and learning more about positive discipline, it really brought this, like, to my heart, and understanding that, okay, it's not just a behavior, it's what's, it's what's underneath, like that little iceberg, the tip of the iceberg, isn't it?
Yeah. So children want to be successful. I think, that is, a primary tenet of Montessori, that we trust that there's something, a spirit deep down inside of them that wants to navigate life successfully. They want to learn. They want to cooperate. They want to have harmonious relationships, but they're not born with those skills, right? And so, to your point, Lucy, when you start to understand what the motivation is behind some of those misbehaviors, which in truth sometimes are, they're unattractive, right? They're embarrassing. They can be ugly. And I think sometimes we, especially in this kind of work, one of the things I love to do when I work with teachers or parents is, to use some pretty blunt language, because it's what we're all thinking and we're all feeling. But, somehow there's this rule that we can't, that we can't be honest with what's really going on, right? And so, I've, a lot of times I'll ask parents or teachers, do you always like children all the time?
Yeah.
And then, 80% of the people raise their hand, and I'll joke around. I'll say, look, okay, the other 20%, you'll find that you can be honest here at some point, right? Because we're dealing with human beings, whether they're little or whether they're, they're grown-ups. And sometimes children's behavior can really camouflage what's going on underneath. Their external behavior could be, again, embarrassing. It could be distasteful. It could be hurtful or disrespectful. And naturally, we're not gonna like that, right?
Yeah.
But it's still a response. So I think it's important to understand that that's okay not to like that. It's okay for us to have a human reaction. Now, as adults, it's also our responsibility to learn to find out what's underneath and to learn to like them, because it's what's underneath that we're going to find the real treasure. And I just want to mention one thing, because we've talked a little bit about the classroom stuff, but I'm here to talk about parenting.
Yes.
I want to make a full disclosure, and that is that this is a confession of sorts. That I was a teacher for about 7-8 years before I had my own children. And I cast a lot of judgment on parents, right? And I had a lot of great advice. And it was really interesting when I had my own children, how difficult it was to take my own advice, right?
Yeah.
I'm a hypocrite, right? And I still am. And I say that loosely because what I mean by that is I still make a lot of mistakes. I've got 5 children from 23 down to 2.
Incredible.
And yeah. I'm not going to stop until I figure this out, until I get it right. So I'm going to.
So baby number 6 is coming.
Yeah. Have you got something to tell us?
No. Yeah. You never know. So I found it way easier to work with other people's children than I did my own.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm intimately connected with my children. They are wrapped up in my own hopes, my own dreams, my own ambitions for them, the way that I want to see the world. And so I found that a new challenge becoming a parent, that all of a sudden it was a humbling experience. That it's the hardest work. Working in the classroom is difficult. The biggest challenge is being a parent.
Yeah, I can imagine. And speaking of challenges, Chip, so many parents, they come to us and they ask us about transitions. If there's a secret, what happens? Because like transitions, they can be such a big issue for so many families. Why do you think transitions are such a critical moment in their day? And like, do you have any thoughts to share, or maybe any tips or advice that these families can take with them?
Well, let's start with empathy, right? I'm 58. Transitions are difficult for me.
Yeah.
So why would I assume that they're going to be easy for children? Right?
Yeah.
And if they're difficult for me, and I don't, if just me getting out the door with just me, right? Now you add a few children involved, and there's a whole bunch of variables that are at play. So that's a perfect example of why it's easier to do at school, even though transitions can be difficult at school, than it is at home. Because at school, we have we're there only for the kids, right? You might take a break during the day, but we have an environment set up for them. We have a routine set up for them. We have schedules set up for them. We have support. We try to think about every little thing that could go wrong and try to plan for it. If I could do that at home, I don't know, it'd be a miracle, right? So there's just there's too many things that are going on in any given household to have that level of structure. But it doesn't mean that we don't try to put in structure. So I think, so just to keep it simple, for transitions, one of the let me just frame it this way: is we have what we call a 3-period lesson in Montessori, right? Which is the first step is we simply introduce the information to the children. The second thing we do is we practice with it. And then the third thing that we do is we apply it. So I think one of the keys to successful transitions at home, at least in my experience, has been introducing what we need to do to the children, and most importantly, involving them, right?
Yeah.
So when I first was on my parenting journey, I created these routine charts for my children. And I want to tell you, they were beautiful, right? I'm a Montessori teacher. I know how to make stuff like that.
Yeah.
And they worked. I showed them to the children. They were very excited about them. And they followed them for a week or so until they didn't, right?
So the routine charts, Chip, it had like your signature, right? Created and made by Chip DeLorenzo.
Right, I had copyrighted, right? I was going to sell it, you know.
Patent.
All my own Pinterest channel. I'll have an after school about me. And it fell short, right? So the kids stopped doing what I wanted them to do. I got frustrated, tried to bring them back to the routine chart. I was back in charge. What I didn't fully grasp or embrace is that limits aren't limits until they're tested. And one of the principles that we try to operate from, you know, in Montessori and in positive discipline is that people are more cooperative and more invested when they participate.
Yes.
So I went back to the drawing board and then created the routine charts with the children, right? And so we talked about what's going well, what's not going well. So we kind of recreated them. They still went on the fridge, right? But their cooperation went from a 2 to an 8.
Wow.
And that was a significant difference. And then I have to understand is that a transition is like everything else. It's not going to be perfect. With children, limits aren't limits until they're tested. So even if you make an agreement with each other, I think it's important for us to adjust our expectations that they're going to break that agreement. They're going to test that limit. As a matter of fact, we should worry if they don't. Right?
Yeah, definitely. I was going to say, like, we should expect them to test these limits, right?
I was just reading Rudolf Dreikers' book yesterday, Psychology in the Classroom, and there's a whole section that he was talking about is that sometimes children, if they're exhibiting that kind of perfect or good behavior, that in itself could actually be more worrisome than if children are actively testing limits, right? And so the second piece is really to understand that was going to happen and have a bit of a plan myself about how to respond when they did. And so a lot of the work we do in positive discipline is about maintaining limits with dignity and respect for everybody in that situation. And then we also brought things back to our family meeting. So the testing the limits is the practice, right? So they push up against the adult, and hopefully we're responding both kindly and firmly. But then we apply that information and we use the family meeting to do that. And all the family meeting is a place where we solve problems together. So as things, got jumbled with a particular transition, we talked about it, we examined what was going on, and we made some adjustments together, right? And when you do that, it's much easier, first of all, to follow through. The cooperation will be much higher. We've all been in workplaces, most of us, right, where you've had whoever's in charge or superior, and they send out a memo and this is what's going to happen, right? And it's top down. People figure out ways really quickly to manipulate, to get around those things, right? But with adults, if you bring adults into the conversation to help doing some problem solving, cooperation goes way up. Well, the same is true with children. So planning together, having ways to follow through as an adult that are going to be kind and firm, and then continuing to monitor that plan together. So we're learning when we make mistakes. Hey, this isn't working. Well, let's figure it out together. So.
Yeah, I think that's the key, isn't it, Chip? It's just like inviting cooperation and just we can never say that like children are too young. We're always going to find a way to involve these children in creating these routines, aren't we?
Absolutely. Going on to another issue, which I know a lot of parents are really worried about at the moment, and that is screen time. So how did you handle this in your family? And I can imagine it was probably very different from your oldest child to your now youngest child. I mean, things have changed, right, in those 20 years.
So yeah, I have some pretty strong opinions on this. So if I want to just, whoever's watching, give you certainly the freedom, which you obviously know you have, to disagree, right? But some of I will tell you this, is that my opinion on this came from some years of hard-won experience, and I'll share just a quick anecdote for you from when I was the head of school in a number of years ago. So I was head of school when smartphones came on the scene for kids, and social media did. And what was interesting is I remember the first couple of years that this kind of came into our sphere. We had somebody come in and talk to the parents about some of the dangers, some of the ramifications, some of the things that the issues that were at hand with social media. We actually even had a child who we had the FBI at our school. Now this is our Department of Homeland Security. We're a quaint little school on the coast of Maine, right? This is not, we're not in the middle of a big urban area, right? Because the child had gotten through a chat on a game, was talking to somebody who appeared to be an adult, who was then going to come pick her up, she's a middle school student, 14, was going to pick her up in the middle of the night outside of her house. So we had we caught wind of this and brought in the police and everybody. So it was front and center. So we brought somebody in to talk to the parents. And what was interesting at that time is that the parents had some really insightful questions, right? They were asking questions like, how do we protect our children? How do we teach this to our children? What's too much for them? What is setting them up for failure? How do we set them up for success? Do we even get these things? 2 years later, the questions stopped, right? And we're seeing parents hand these things out like they're playing cards. The danger didn't decrease; it just became accepted in our culture. And now what we're seeing is, schools are going back the other way. They went from being very liberal with their policies with this to all of a sudden you're seeing sometimes schools, they're not even allowed on campus in some schools now. We're starting to see that more and more. So anyway, you asked me a question about it from a parent's perspective, but that experience really affected how I saw things as a parent. I got to see things as a teacher on the front lines with this. So my children, we don't give them smartphones until they can afford to pay their own bill, and they're 18. Actually, I shouldn't say that. They get a really dumbed down version. Very locked down version when they're 16. What we understand in Montessori and through positive discipline is that, consequences are a part of navigating life, right? And we want to teach children to navigate those consequences, not just protect them. But there are some consequences we have to look when we look at consequences. One of the judgments we have to make as parents and as teachers is that we have to decide, can my child absorb these consequences, right? Can they, when all of my children have been, a year and a half, I taught them all to kind of go down to go down the stairs. We've always had carpeted stairs, right? And so I taught them to go down backwards on their belly, right? Because eventually somebody's going to get over the baby gate, right? and tumble down. That's one of the more dangerous things that happen in the house. So in teaching them how to go down the stairs backwards, sometimes I would let them fall a step or two, right? It would make them afraid. I'd be right there to catch them. So they could absorb that consequence as they were learning. They could not absorb the consequence of letting them come down by themselves the first or second time while I stood at the bottom of the stairs, right? So I would obviously I'd make sure that net is there. So if you apply that analogy to technology, I think that's the decision-making process as parents that we need to make, which is what are the potential consequences of this technology? Can my child absorb them at this age? If they can't, then possibly they shouldn't. It's not something we want to teach them to navigate at that point, right? And so I think those are, I think the questions are more important than the answer. How I landed on that was just through my experience and my judgment. Someone else might feel differently about that. And my best friend, he gave his children smartphones when they were 9th grade, but he's got them. They don't use social media and they lock them down pretty hard. And so he gives them a few years before I did. He's also a principal. And it's interesting, like you'll see people like principals and tech people, they seem to have, what I'm reading is they seem to have stronger limits for their children than
I've heard that as well.
Yeah, so it's interesting.
It's so interesting that you that in a way you are mentioning how children can actually start building resilience, even just through the use of screen and tech, because that's actually our next question to you, Chip. So parents all over the world, they're always asking how they can help their children build resilience. So how do you run into this? And what have you done with your children in this regards? How do you believe that resilience should be built in a child's life?
Well, there's many ways. I think the first thing to acknowledge is that this is a concern from parents and teachers all over the world right now. I think it's worth discussing some of the factors that potentially could have led us there. And so there's a few things that that possibly have brought us to a place where we're seeing children as being less resilient than we might have seen 15 or 20 years ago. We certainly, when we were all growing up, children had a lot more freedom outside of the home, right? And they were playing in their neighborhoods more freely. They had more unsupervised time from parents. When I was growing up, there was no such thing as a play date, right? You play with kids in your neighborhood. Now, the same thing I just want to say is that there's probably some things that my generation could have learned from current parents, right? There are some freedoms that they maybe shouldn't have given us. But that being said, there's also been, in that vein, there has been this, what I see as an unwritten rule has evolved. And that unwritten rule is that you're neglecting your children if you allow them to experience any disappointment or discouragement or discomfort, right? And there's a lot of pressure on parents, right? I feel it even now. I think I shared with you both a story that happened very recently for us when we were at the zoo. And my 2-year-old daughter was climbing over a play structure. It was like 2 hippopotamus, that they built for a play structure. There's lots of padding underneath these things. And this child who was about 4 or 5, I couldn't really tell. He was a big kid, and his parents were like hovering over him. And anytime he misstepped, they'd grab him so that he wouldn't fall off of this thing. And there was, if we go back to that stair analogy, there's the likelihood of him getting seriously hurt was really, really low, right?
Yeah.
In today's litigious world, I can't imagine the Cincinnati Zoo putting something out where a child could get seriously hurt, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But anyway, we're letting our 2-year-old fall whenever she fell. So a couple of times she cried, then she got back up every time and wanted to climb it again and try again. So in that scenario, I'm watching my daughter learn some incredibly important life lessons. She's falling, she's getting hurt, she's going back, There's some areas that the way she was placing her feet and her hands started to change because she was learning through her experience and her discomfort to climb this. She was learning to be careful, which was what those other parents really wanted for their child. They didn't want them to get hurt. And she's learning resilience. She's learning that it's going to be okay. So we had to express some confidence in her in that. So when she looked back at us and at 2, her sense of being safe or unsafe a lot of times comes from us, right? When your child looks back at you. So if you're like, right?
That's it.
They're going to pick that up.
Yeah.
And so in a span of about 15 minutes, she became more confident. She was building her resilient skills. And I felt really badly for the other child because I thought, what are the lessons that child is learning? And so I think that's a good kind of an analogy for building resilience, is allowing children to have some of those experiences. And it's really difficult because there is a peer pressure. And I felt it in that situation because not only was that parent watching her child, she was watching us, right? Not doing anything.
A lot.
Right. And I have no idea what was going on for her. Maybe she was reconsidering her decisions, but my worry was that she was judging me.
Yeah.
So a lot of times what happens is that we're not so as worried about our children falling as we're worried about being judged.
Parents.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation, isn't it?
It's a lot of courage to allow those things to happen. And I'll just share one more thing. I think the other thing is that in terms of building resilience, is that we've gotten away. We don't need children the way that we used to, right? I mean, we need them certainly to continue on the human race. But back when I was growing up, I'm sure many of us, children had a lot more responsibility. I had a paper route when I was 11 years old. And so I would ride my bicycle, a couple miles from my house, sometimes at 5 o'clock in the morning by myself.
Wow.
Papers. That was not a wow back when I was growing up. A lot of kids.
Was it not? Oh my days.
We grew up in a farming community, and 12-year-olds had tractor licenses and were driving on public roads, going from one barn to another in there, right? Wow. And so sometimes we've lost sight of how capable children really are. But the thing is, when I say we don't need children, a lot of our modern conveniences, a lot of the way that we live today, there really isn't a need for children to contribute the way that they used to. So a lot of that has to come up, I wouldn't say artificially, but it has to be built in. It has to be built in intentionally. So what things around the house could the children be learning to do so that they can learn how capable they are? All those life lessons that come from those challenging things, like my 14-year-old, he takes care of all of the pool, right, in our house.
Wow.
So he cleans it, he helps repair it, he cleans the filter, right? I don't want to pay anyone else to do it, so part of it's self-serving, but he has to figure out a lot of problems. Like we covered the pool this fall to get, keep it protected from leaves, but we watched the cover start to drip. So he had to pull the whole cover off because there was a leak, and it was an above ground pool. There's a leak in the pool. So at 14, he had to go and find it. It was freezing out. He had to dive in with his goggles, find the pool, repair the pool, get his siblings to help them to recover the pool. And through that entire situation, he was learning resilience, that he could jump in some cold water and be okay. Right? Everybody's cold plunging right now. He's gonna be fine. Right?
Yeah, it's trendy. It's fine.
Very Wim Hof. Yeah.
And you know what, Chip? One thing that keeps that I keep thinking of, it's not just the resilience, but it's the self-esteem, isn't it? It's like all of this, what we love to say, isn't it, Amanda, that competence builds confidence, and you are just giving these children so many opportunities for them to actually build competence, right? To just giving them chance for them to problem solve, even if it's like at the playgrounds, but they're they're learning how to work out the best route and what, like to strategize how to go from point A to B in a safe way. And then even if they fall, okay, so how can I do better next time? Which is beautiful, because that's one of the biggest essences in positive discipline, isn't it? Learning from your mistakes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just keep thinking like, wow, your children, they must have the most healthy self-esteem in the world.
I know.
Well,
I think a lot of the time
is that we started off, you asked me, how did I find this work?
Yeah.
I found it through failure, right? And that's how we build resilience, right? How do we build resilience? What even is resilience, right? And so we could just do a layperson's definition of the ability to fail and to get back up again. So failure is really important to experience, because when do you want to have your children experience that failure? Now, where they're growing and developing, or when they have their first job and they've never had the experience of failing, and now they can't. That could be a self-esteem destroyer.
Yeah.
So that's a great point.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we see that the home and being, like surrounded by your loved ones as you grow, that is the best, practice ground there is, isn't it? It's like, hey, just practice making mistakes when you're surrounded by people who love you unconditionally. Yes. Because that's it. What you said, Chip, like when they go out there, when they, when they move out of, their homes and they start living an adult life, and maybe they get their first job, or maybe they go to university, and for some reason it's just not going really well. They have already had so many years of practice, and they can still navigate these hard times, in a healthier way, and knowing that they will manage to get through it.
Right. Exactly. And that's one of the things, if your child is in a Montessori classroom, it's one of the things that you can be grateful for, because children learn, build resilience, I think, better than in most educational environments, because our whole environments they teach children how to learn through trial and error, right? And the children have responsibilities in the classroom. The teacher doesn't go in and, hopefully doesn't go in and rescue them every time they have a social difficulty. Instead, they teach them how to navigate it, so that they're having some of these social and just skill building experiences all the time.
Absolutely. So, Chip, most lives that we do, we always have a parent question. And the one that came in this week is about sibling rivalry. And we thought this would be a great one to throw at you, because I'm sure you've experienced, or maybe not, with 5 children.
Have you actually experienced sibling rivalry in your life as a parent?
It would be great to get your insights into, how basically you dealt with it, and any tips for this parent. She didn't actually say how old the children were, but yeah.
So, well, my children are I have 2 15, 13, 18, and 23. So to be honest with you, in the beginning, I didn't experience this the whole lot. I did some. There's definitely some sibling rivalry, and I patted myself on the back for being such a wonderful parent. Yeah. But when my 4th child came along, Teresa, the first 3 were boys. Peter, who was the youngest, was dethroned. Right? He was the quintessential youngest child up until that point. He just loved being coddled and babied, and he was super sweet. So he invited a lot of that attention for adults, right? And all of a sudden, everyone is paying attention to the newborn Teresa, right? And he is not the darling anymore. And it was so she really dethroned him from that position. So as you can imagine, a couple of years goes by and it gets worse. I just, so funny, because this morning we ran across a picture of them. Oh, there you go. Right.
Oh, my days.
This was on my feed, my Facebook feed this morning, my morning meditation, right? And this comes up as a memory from 12 years ago. And there's Teresa as an infant, and Peter just loved her, just absolutely loved her, would curl up with her. And to this day, they have a love-hate relationship, right? And so Teresa gets a little older, 2-3 years old, and it's really starting to heat up. And my self-assessment of being a wonderful parent who avoided these big sibling rivalries went, right? And these two really put us through the paces. And still do. And so I showed this photo to the family this morning, and everybody's joking around like, oh, if we only knew what was coming. So I'll share with you another experience that I had when I took when I started learning how to teach this work to parents. And there's an activity in Jane's work called the 3 Bs, right? Yes. And the concept is that you stay out of any arguments that are going on with the children. Now, this was in a little bit of conflict for me because I was a Montessori teacher, and I was trained how to help children manage conflict with one another. And so my roadmap was going to be, I was going to do this the same way that I did in the classroom. Dreikers and other, they got it. Like that approach did not work at home. And the reason that it didn't work at home is because when children are at school, if there's an argument or if there's an issue that's happening between them, there's a 90% chance in my estimation that the issue at hand is the issue at hand, right? But when they're at home, the issue at hand is camouflaged by what's really going on. So if they're arguing over, I don't know, what did they argue over most recently? I don't know. There's a perspective on a social situation at school, right? And if I got involved in that and helped them to try to navigate that, whenever I've done that, at the end, even when I felt like I did it this time, I didn't, I was completely neutral. I just asked reframing questions. I helped them to navigate this. A half hour later, one of them comes up to me and is angry with me because they said, you took the other person's side. And it's like, there's no way I handled it perfectly. So what Dreiker said is that the issue at hand really at home is that they're trying to loop the adults in, right, to the situation. They're trying to pull us into the argument. And a lot of that has to do with birth order thing. I mean, there's more going on there. But so what happened is that when I learned about that 3 Bs, when I first heard about it, I refused to present it because I thought it was before I had these experiences at home. Because I thought it was I thought I had the skill to do better, and B, it seemed like it was almost neglectful to the children. And so what the 3 Bs are is there are ways for adults to not intervene and to allow children to work it out themselves. This is really important because it goes back to our previous conversation about resilience, right? So the 3 Bs are beat it, boot them, and bear it. So beat it means that if your children are arguing, check out, leave the scene, right? Smile, nod, and go to the other room and read it.
Smile away, walk away. It's like Homer Simpson in the bushes, isn't it?
Right, exactly. You're out.
That's it.
You could just bear it. So if I'm sitting here cutting vegetables or something and the children are arguing, I just don't get involved. I just continue to do what I do and I don't pay it any mind. And then the third way to do it is to boot them, which is to, have them both leave the house, or the room or what have you. So I've taken 2 of my kids' hands and just walked them to the door, opened up the door, shut it, locked it, and went back to what I was doing. The first time that I tried this, I was, again, it was because I was out of answers. I was trying to help my kids negotiate conflict. I was trying to support them and to teach them relationship skills. I failed every time. And so I just got, I was just out of answers. So I'm going to try this silly thing. Right? And so, and it was actually with my two oldest. It was when this first happened, and it helped me with Peter and Teresa, is that Nicholas, who's my second oldest, was walking by his brother Quinn, who was much bigger than him. And I caught this scene out of the corner of my eye, and he walked by Quinn, and he threw a punch at him in the stomach, right? And I was like, what? They didn't know that I could see this because I was kind of around the door. And then Quinn, the oldest, just turned around and pile drived him down onto the floor. Nicholas, who was about 5 years younger, just starts screaming and crying, "Dad, Dad!" And what I had just witnessed is that Nicholas was willing to sacrifice his own body to get his brother in trouble, right? There was no antecedent to that entire situation, right? And so I just took them both by the hand, Nicholas crying, right? And I led them out the door. I locked the door, right? And I went back in to do what I was doing. And it was a huge leap of faith. I'm like, this is not what I was trained to do. 5 minutes later, they're both poking their heads up on the windows around the house, laughing and giggling, right? It had nothing to do with the hitting or anything like that, right? It was completely counterintuitive. Now, hopefully your children aren't beating each other up like Nicholas and Quinn were, but I used that with Peter and Teresa from then on out, and it was a lifesaver. And so even to this day, it happened just the other week. They were arguing over kitchen jobs, and we had made an agreement with the family meeting. They weren't Peter wasn't following through. Teresa was angry. She wanted us to intervene. And I said, "You work that out with your brother." And she was really upset, but 15 minutes later, they were both working in the kitchen harmoniously. So that is a tool. And I just want to give a qualifier. If children are truly hurt, like if there's a physical safety, or if there starts to become a real power imbalance where there's some true kind of bullying happening between one sibling and the other, like our stairs analogy, that's a place where you would want to intervene as an adult, because we, in that situation with Nicholas and Quinn, I knew they could both absorb those consequences. And it was invited by Nicholas when he punched his brother. Quinn didn't do any lasting damage, and he wasn't, that was not the dynamic that was happening between them. But if Quinn was 5 years older and he was, there's a significant power imbalance in that relationship, and Quinn was using that to his advantage and to do some potential long-term harm, I would have intervened.
Of course.
Chip, it's so interesting that you mentioned the 3 Bs, because I imagine that so many parents out there, they must be thinking, whoa, this is way too radical. Not in a million years would I do this with my children, just boot them out, or I would just beat it, I would leave the room, or who am I? Like, what kind of human being do you think I am for just bearing it? Can you just explain, you can just explain it any way you want, to these parents who are in certain disbelief that these tools actually work? What are the reasons behind it? And like, what kind of message are we adults sending to these children when we implement any of these tools?
So I'm going to answer your question directly second. But what I would say first is that if you're finding that whatever you're doing is working, go ahead and use it, right? The way that I felt the exact same way. So when I used that, when I used the 3 Bs, when I used basically disengaging from the arguments as my approach, it was because I was out of answers, right? And I was out of answers, and I was highly trained in how to resolve conflict with children, right? So if you have something that's working for you, go ahead. But if you're finding yourself always intervening, the children always upset afterwards, one of the things that begins to actually happen is that when if you're doing too much intervention, we actually wind up inviting the very thing that we're trying to avoid, right? So what often happens, not every time, is that the oldest starts getting the focus because they're bigger, they should know better, right? I was an oldest, I understand that. And that's what happened, but the younger one starts to pick up on that, right? And that's what happened with Nicholas in that situation. He knew, like, there's no antecedent to that situation. They weren't in an argument. It was first thing in the morning. It was still dark outside. And Nicholas just punched his brother in the stomach, knowing that he would hit him. And he was actually willing to have that sacrifice to get his brother in trouble. And so guess how he knew that he was going to get his brother in trouble?
By getting you involved.
Because I had been involved before.
Yeah.
I had gotten into too much. So that's what tends to happen is we actually, the reason why it's important to disengage, as long as you feel that it's, that's safe and reasonable, which is most of the time, right? Is because we don't want to actually feed into or start to unintentionally build a bully victim relationship between the siblings. And it's really subtle. A lot of times parents don't realize until a couple of years later that the apparent victim is not really such a victim at all, right? And if those of you who are youngest children, you can probably be like, yep, I remember, or
yeah.
Yes.
I
remember as an oldest child, I remember walking by a mirror in my hallway, and whatever the wind current or whatever had this mirror fall off. This is back at a different time, but my mother ran up the stairs because she heard my sister crying. My sister was crying because she was startled by the mirror. She just put me over and spanked me. She didn't ask any questions. Right?
Wow. Oh God.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you can see like that was already, that was well.
That dynamic was set. Yeah. I was also an oldest child, Chip, so I can empathize. Yeah.
Yeah.
Often in trouble.
Right. So that's sibling rivalry, and and there's a lot to it. As a matter of fact, great book for anybody who's who's out there is by Elaine Maslish, and I forgot the other author's name, but it's called Siblings Without Rivalry. It's a wonderful book.
That's
the authors of same authors that wrote How to Talk So Children Will Listen. Is that the one?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
And I think that just to wrap this up, I think that one of the things that these 3 B's give is us trusting that these children will be able to solve the problem by themselves, right?
Absolutely.
So again, we are inviting them to build competence in problem solving and maybe like negotiating, right? Like just developing their communication skills and making sure that they can handle it by themselves without the need of having an adult interfering and mediating it. It's just them, and it takes a lot of courage, doesn't it?
But more often they do. I used to nanny, and I used to have kids in the back just always going, and once I'd learned that tool, just put them in the same boat. It just made car journeys so much better.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's a much easier tool actually.
Yeah, and if you couple that with
think we.
Oh, go ahead. Let me just say one more thing. So I just want to say, if you couple that with family meetings where you do family problem solving together, so that you can actually teach some of those skills, they really balance each other out nicely. Sorry to interrupt you, Amanda.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Wow, I can't.
No.
Thank you so much for all of these amazing insights. That was it's just so good to
Yeah,
hear
it's been
more from
wonderful.
Chip the dad, right? And like what life is like, you know,
Exactly.
like family life, and being a
Messy.
Montessori parent. Hey, that's it,
And
isn't it?
real.
It's interesting because it kind of like breaks the that maybe like people have an image that, oh, you know, like because you were the co-author of such an amazing book, and you know, like you know everything about positive discipline and Montessori, you know, like in the classroom and definitely at home as well. People, they may still have the image that, oh well, so I you know, I'm sure that everything in his life is just absolutely
You would have it
perfect.
perfect.
And how gorgeous it is, isn't it? For us to see that, hey, you know what? Maybe what people see in social media, because let's face it, Chip, there are so many perfect parents out there in social media, aren't there?
Yeah.
So it's like, it's good for us to kind of like bring, you know, like this more like down to earth a view and perspective on parenting, and you know, like on teaching as well, and seeing that, hey, you know what, life is messy, it's how it is, and it's just, you know, I think that the important thing here is for us to learn how to navigate this messiness, isn't it? And it's just finding like a decent way to just get out there.
We're all making our way.
That's it. Wow,
Absolutely.
thank you so much, Chip. That was just brilliant.
Thank you so much. And yeah, hopefully you'll come back again at some point next year.
It's so much fun working with you all as always. Yeah.
Oh, Chip, you're the best. So, Chip, is there anything else you would like to say?
I just want to keep do a little plug for your work. It has been wonderful seeing you guys out there doing this work, talking to Montessori parents, and it's a real need. You know, and wherever I go, and I work, you know, I work, you know, I do a lot of bigger presentations to parents, and they, what I hear back over and over again is that they are hungry for this support. So I really want to thank you for the work that you're doing, and making it so accessible for people, and so not only accessible technologically, but accessible in terms of you're offering some really simple, powerful, concrete ways to help navigate the most difficult job on earth. So thanks for the work that you're doing.
Wow, Chip, we can only be so grateful to you as well, Chip, because I mean, like we learn from the masters, and you are definitely one of them. So
thank you.
we're the ones who need to appreciate you so much, and all the work you do, you know, like all the articles that you write in your blog. I mean, wow, it's just like it is just packed with so much, you know, like information and so many takeaways. And we can only, we can only appreciate you for it. And and thank you so much for doing this with Jane. It's just
the book's fantastic.
Brilliant.
We've actually got Jane coming on next, Chip. She's going to be our next guest in January, which is very exciting.
Yes.
Who's that?
Jane Nelsen.
Oh, great.
The one and only.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
So it's nice that you guys are actually, kind of.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So I just
once again, thank you so much.
I put in the chat, by the way, a link if anybody, if you want to sign up for the newsletter. The newsletter is free. So if you
that's wonderful.
Would like if any would like to be on that, it comes out once a month and discusses some of these. We usually discuss a significant behavior, a misbehavior, and how to navigate it. So that's there. So thanks again.
Carolyn has she's already shared the link, and we'll make sure to also leave the link in the comments as well when like when this live stream is
Wonderful.
In the other platform. So
thanks for having me
so very much, Chip.
Thanks
it
so
was
much,
an absolute pleasure having you.
I look forward to working with you guys on our master class for the Brazilian audience.
That's it. Yes. Oh my days! There's just so many exciting things coming. Thank you very much.
Have a great holiday, Chip. And thanks everyone for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you in 2025.
Yay.
Bye.
Bye everyone. Thank you.